Once again I get to greet you. It's been quite a while. What a ride we
Welcome. So
Thank
lots of conversations around sustainability. I mean, it's almost in every panel. So you're in the right job and the hot seat. How did you get onto the sustainable? Because you started off in planning, right, in your career?
Actually, perhaps that's also a story of how really sustainability has come to the forefront. I'm in charge of strategic planning for Sentosa, but really sustainability has always been like a tenet for Sentosa through the years. But we have observed how in the past 2 to 3 years, it has really accelerated the pace in which we really need to, sorry to use this word, pivot into this new reality for us. And of course, as part of strategic planning, this is not a trend that we can ignore. So as part of my portfolio, we always believe that strategy is 80% execution, and one of the privileges I have is also to incubate new priority projects, and of course sustainability is one of those things.
Right,
that
very, very exciting job that you have. And actually, we had so many questions that came in for that panel. So we're going to try and ask you those questions too.
Oh, sure, no
we'll see if
problems.
you can answer them. But
Okay.
anyway, the good news is Sentosa also turned 50 this year, right?
Yeah,
And-
that's
and
right, that's right,
Turned
yeah.
50, and so how's the journey been so far? In terms of sustainability, how far are you in that journey? Say 1 to 10. Let's say you want to get a 10. What point are you at now?
Yeah, I always, being Asians, we tend to always have a little bit of want to downplay where we are at. So I always feel like we are 3 to 5, right? But you brought up the point that we are 50 years old. I'm sure the Singaporeans in this room will remember when we were young, how we go to Sentosa, take a ferry and go to this green island, take a round island trip on a monorail, which is electric transport, by the way. But think about it, if our forefathers had not reimagined the island as a tourism destination, actually how we would imagine this island would be completely different. It was first a defense site, and then it was earmarked for petrochemicals, but thankfully it was saved from that future. And because it was imagined as a tourism site, it actually had very different developmental principles versus the rest of the other island. We have high green coverage, low built-up area, and how we design transport on the island is wholly different. And so because we have these sustainable principles kind of built into where we are already, we have the opportunity to build on it.
Right.
But moving forward, which is really your question, how do we safeguard these principles into how we operate? I think that's where it's very important, not only to just have a vision, but also to have a plan. So last year, we launched a sustainable roadmap for Sentosa, which set about 2 key goals. The first one is decarbonization by 2030, and the second one is to become a globally recognized sustainable destination, both of which are challenging to us. Yeah.
Which you actually got already, right? The global recognized, because you got the certification in August under the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, and that made you the first island destination in Asia and one of 23 other certified destinations in the world. So you got 1 point.
Yep.
All right. So now you have the responsibility in the next 50 years to imagine Sentosa for the next generation, right? And we'll get to that at the last question when you imagine the future. Okay. So let's talk about tourism recovery too as well, right?
Sure.
Because this time last year, almost 2 years already, all tourism to Singapore was domestic, so was Sentosa. How has this changed since Singapore's borders reopened?
Obviously now that travel borders have opened, we are beginning to see an influx of tourists. And we must say that we are also very fortunate that the domestic market that has come to Sentosa during the pandemic period. And during the pandemic period, we saw historical peaks in terms of local visitorship. So thank you to all the Singaporeans for supporting Sentosa. And we're seeing that we are still retaining a big part of it. And I think part of the reason is because we've discovered a little bit of Sentosa's role in Singapore society, which is perhaps to be an escape valve, for Singaporeans during this highly stressful period. And I think as tourists come back, we're hoping to extend that same proposition to them as they come back. On your question about how the level of tourism, I think we're still in a transition period. Major markets like China have not yet opened up. But we understand that actually right now, how travel is trending is really on factorized by two elements, right? The first one is travel restrictions, which has really constrained how, when travelers want to travel. And the second one is supply chain, because airlines are still reactivating themselves, airline tickets are expensive. But over time, we believe that will change. Yeah.
What percentage now is international versus domestic right now?
Oh, right now I would still say it's mainly domestic.
It's still mainly domestic.
Yeah. But I would say that this trend is reversing, and we are seeing a month-on-month change, which to us is a good sign, right, for the businesses. But hopefully, you know, in time to come, we are seeing a better balance of domestic as well as international travelers, because I believe that part of the trend, other than sustainable travel, people are also looking for more authentic travel as well. So propositions which meet both markets is always a good thing.
So let's dig deeper into the certification audit, because, you know, I feel like sometimes people just want things to be rubber stamped, right? And say, oh, I'm part of this, I'm part of that, and let's collect as many stamps as we can. So let's look at the certification audit, which looks at 4 categories, which is sustainable management, socio-economic sustainability, cultural sustainability, and environmental sustainability, right? So which area, I'm sure that Sentosa scored pretty high because, you know, we are all such good students in Singapore, but which category do you think you need to do better at, that you're not too happy with? Which aspect?
I would say we need to do better in all categories.
Oh.
Well,
But
first
one
of all,
more than the other. One more than the other.
I would say, first of all, the Global Sustainable Tourism Council destination criteria is one of the most extensive criteria, which aligns very closely with the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it's a good starting platform, and we are very encouraged that we have managed to secure this milestone early. But by all means, we do not think that this is the end of the journey. We know that we have to progress as requirements change, as travelers' demand increase, even as climate change impacts become more and more real. Right, so that's why we feel like it's not a situation where we can claim to be there yet. But we think we have a good platform. It's a measurable platform which allows us to look at where we are versus best practices in the world. To us, even as we look at how we progress on the pathways in terms of the areas of focus in which we have mapped out, like for example, decarbonization, in terms of offerings, we also recognize that actually a key area which we need to make advancement in is the cultural imperative. Sustainable change is always driven by people, and I think that's where we need to do more. On Sentosa, we have done some of the things that the panel before talked about, aligning the lingo. So take, for example, we have a common island carbon profiling methodology, so that when you talk about scope 1, scope 2, people understand what that means. We have
you mean your partners understand, your industry
yes, that's
partners
right. Our business
that.
ecosystem on the island, right? We have also set up a carbon neutral alliance on Sentosa, which is comprising of 21 business partners, which account for 97% of our carbon profile. And collectively, we are coming together to talk about solutions, problem solve, which leverage one another so that we can find synergies in between.
Is there a measurable outcome out of this collaborative initiative?
Yeah, of course.
Give us one example.
Sure, I'll give you a couple. So the first one is by having a sense of what we are accountable for. Sustainability ultimately can be viewed as an accountability issue. What areas of carbon profile are we accountable for, right? Because of our business, because of the choices that we make. And if you are able to line that out and you understand which are the needle-moving areas, that provides you actually the opportunity to start taking action on it. So we've done so for each one of our carbon neutral members, and so they now have a sense of which are their major carbon contributors and actions that they need to take today. Right, which could be low-hanging fruits so that they can make advancement on that. So that's example number one. Another example that we also start to look at is solutioning. So earlier this year, we announced an initiative to begin solarizing our rooftops, and we consolidated 18 rooftop spaces, some of which are short tenures, which would not have been used for solarization in the past, but because of economies of scale, are unlocked. And together, we generate about 4 gigawatt hours of renewable energy, which is roughly equivalent to about 60,000 hotel room nights.
So it's a bit like, I think yesterday we had a think tank around sustainability, and we talked about, you know, one challenge that suppliers were facing was rising costs and all that, right? So this co-op model actually addresses the rising costs at the same time, helps them become more sustainable. So when you do those kind of audits, like, you have this certificate, do you think it actually helps you win more events business? Does it, because Brenda was saying just now on EY and said that for her, it's like difficult to understand when she should push a business to which destination or that destination. So how are you using that to say, okay, Sentosa is the place to come to for events?
I would say different solutions meet different problem statements. So like, for example, using solarization, you're right, addresses both your carbon profile as well as your cost of doing business. Today, your solar power probably costs less than your grid power, which has running on fossil fuels have really exponentially increased over time. But I would say to use this as a proposition for green events are only part of the picture. So on Sentosa, we have started on a green event methodology. And part of the problem that Brenda shared just now was, how do I know what is my actual footprint? We have collaborated with Deloitte Carbon Care Asia to develop a green events methodology where you tackle the problem in 3 parts. The first one is you do a bit of carbon accounting based on not after the event, but even before the event. And this is critical because only before the event, then you have the room and the time to mitigate against, take action against your actual carbon footprint. So whether it's offering green transport, sourcing for lower emissions ingredients, reducing your waste footprint through eliminating single-use disposables. So these are all actions that you can do. And of course, finally, you know what is remaining that you can't do anything about after you've done all the action. And those, then you have to look at potential neutralization options.
Right.
Yeah.
And is that something you're going to be sharing with other destinations? Because it seems to be a lot to go through, because I know we talked about doing it here.
Yeah.
So is that something that you are going to be sharing with the industry and make it open source and everybody can plug in and find out?
Yeah, so the methodology actually is not new, but I think it's the execution that makes it a little bit more difficult, right, as you yourself have experienced.
Right.
I think as an island, this is where we think there could be the opportunity as we work across the value chain. So think about venue operators, which already know the levers of their footprint, right? Event organizers, which understand what are the methodology behind how to reduce, and explaining these to their customers up front, right? And then, of course, having understood the methodology, they're able to fill in the data and collect the data in a more seamless manner. And all this would reduce the friction, when customers actually want to choose a green event. So that is, I think, the key to making it more available, more accessible, right, for clients like Brenda.
Yeah.
And EY.
In a way, like Sentosa is the perfect incubator, right? You say you have 21 businesses, and that's already 97% of your supply chain, right? So it's a perfect incubator. Not many places are that tiny and compact. Okay, so we have a question from the audience, and it goes, is sustainability also a destination challenge? If Singapore, for instance, invested less in importing natural gas and more in renewables, wouldn't we all then be better off?
Yeah, of course. But I think there's also realities, right? There's also realities. First of all, Singapore don't have a lot of natural energy sources. I think the government is doing everything they can to explore the cutting edge. The question is what areas and how much can they contribute? On Sentosa, we face the same challenge. We don't have access to natural sources of renewable energy as well. Solarization is, perhaps the most accessible, and we're already creaming what is available. But we are still trying to push the curve. We are looking at things that potentially are not totally mature yet, but perhaps we could be a test bed for some of these things. We are even, for example, looking at things that help us improve our circularity, like waste to energy plants, or even tidal energy, which we have conducted test bits for, and hopefully we can scale up soon.
Okay, so I know you're not in hospitality, but part of your carbon neutral network has hotels in it, right? So this question is related to hotels, and see if you can answer, right?
Sure.
It says, in the hospitality industry, all brands seem to be touting their sustainability efforts, such as refillable soap containers or moving away from daily towel changes. But how does a consumer determine whether sustainability is truly part of the DNA of the brand?
Yeah.
How would you?
It's not an easy question to answer, simply because it also depends on what is the expectation of the person who is asking. I would say that if you were to look at an offering who is touting themselves as sustainable, you really have to go a bit deeper. And sometimes the most revealing factor is about when you talk with their staff and whether they understand how they are doing it and how it contributes to answering the why, which the hotel or the operator is earmarking for themselves to tackle. So whether it's waste, whether it's carbon, whether it's a social problem, whether it's a cultural imperative, I think they need to be able to back up what they are addressing. And I think that is what most people are now looking for, right? This sense of authenticity in which we are looking at solving the problem.
Yeah, not just sort of marketing speak or
Yeah, that's right,
greenwashing.
that's right,
And
yeah.
that's why, I think in the last panel, I said like it's so important for consumers to be part of the
Yeah.
solution, right?
Yeah.
And
But I would also just want to add a word of encouragement, perhaps to some of the travel or hospitality operators out there. Don't let that deter you from starting, because many times we fear that, because we will be accused of greenwashing, that we end up not doing anything or we end up doing something, in secret. I find that it is very important that not only we understand the problem well, we also learn how to articulate it in a way that people can identify and understand what you're doing so that they can come alongside with you, right? I think that's something that we have to be very ready for, to answer challenging questions and be ready to respond to them. Yeah.
right. So therefore, how are you engaging customers in your sustainability roadmap in Sentosa, like the Singaporeans who are coming to Sentosa or the travelers? How are you engaging with that?
Yeah. Actually, there's many areas in which we need to engage our customers. In fact, in some quarters of the industry, they will say you can only go as far as the customer wants. We feel that as a destination operator, we also play a role in terms of advocacy, in terms of helping behavioral change. Ultimately, it's about bringing sustainability from back of the house to front of consciousness. Storytelling, as I mentioned, is an important part of it. So let me give a few examples. Some of our hotels have really begun to introduce elements of sustainability into their wellness products, which I think is a very synergistic offering. So they tell stories about how, as you adopt certain treatment and how they source for local materials, it's not only good for the environment, it's also good for you, right? And they're able to do it in a very nuanced way.
Nuance, yeah, that was
nuanced
another
way.
word, yes, yes.
We are also conducting tours. So during the pandemic period, we work with locals, local operators, to introduce sustainability-themed tours. We have introduced 11 of them on the island, which cover a wide spread of interest areas. So we're able to bring our guests onto intertidal walks
Right.
and talk to them, unpack to them the impact of climate change on coral life, which is a very essential ecosystem towards helping marine life and habitats grow. We bring them to our hidden forts on the island so that they can understand how biodiversity conservation work alongside, how we develop the
So
island.
let them experience rather than being preached to, right? And tell me, these tours, are they priced more than the usual tours, like going to your attractions? So they're priced more?
No, so these tours, we actually looked at the market benchmark, and I think they are priced about how you would expect a walking tour to be conducted along Orchard Road. So it's not unreasonably priced, but you really also want good content because you want this business to be sustainable as well, right?
Right,
Yeah.
and is the take-up rates good by
Yes.
locals as well as visitors, foreign
Well,
visitors?
because it
or
was
is it more-
introduced during the pandemic period, so
Okay.
most of them has been locals. But even among the locals, we say that there is actually a demand for these type of tours because I think one of the unsaid elements about the consumer experience, why would I want to choose a sustainable offering? Actually, they are buying a feeling of hope. And that's why there's great turnoff when there's greenwashing, because they want it to be real hope, right? They want
Right.
the facts to be real, they want the experiences to be real and authentic,
Okay.
and I think that's what we're trying to provide.
Great. So to wrap up the future, because you always have your eye over the horizon, right? And we talked about electrification maybe as the one innovation in sustainability that could be
Yeah.
good. What new tech and innovation in sustainability are you keeping your eye on?
Yeah, so there is no one single silver bullet. I think in Singapore, we have to really look at all sorts of technology that can really help us move the needle towards sustainability and a net zero carbon future. So we really were keeping our eyes all out for whatever technology that could come. Of course, in order for it to be sustainable, it must have a contextual relevance to where we are. It must be feasible. It must have commercial ROI. It must make sense as well. And we set a high bar in terms of how we look at it. Because if we don't go about it with a sense of reality, with a sense of looking into the future and being just where we need to be, then after a while it might be an exercise in futility.
But
right?
is there one
Yeah.
that comes closest to meeting these 4 ticks?
Yeah. So I would
Just one.
say there is one area of innovation that we constantly look out for, which is to transform a linear way of consuming things to a circular way of consuming things. So this is perhaps more not a technology,
Yeah.
but maybe a design principle.
Right, design thinking.
Yeah. So
Okay.
take for example, what do I mean, right? I hope for the day where the iPhone is being produced in such a way where you don't have to throw away the old iPhone when you buy the new one, where you can replace things in modular parts, where instead of owning an iPhone for maybe 2 years, you can own it for 10 years. I'm looking forward to the day where business models arise, where you can reward developers for reusing old buildings rather than demolishing them and rebuilding new ones.
Okay.
And so these are things that we look for when we think about new innovation.
Fantastic. You actually answered a question which was like, how to make mobile devices more sustainable.
Right,
So,
okay.
so
Thank you. I didn't know it was there,
thank
right.
you, Cheh Hsien, for this wonderful conversation.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you.